everybody. Dr. Nick here. I just finished recording another episode of The Hospitality Spirit. My guest today was Shawn Soole. Shawn is a bartender and hospitality entrepreneur based in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. He is the author of 3 cocktail books, Cocktail Culture, Great Northern Cocktails, and BC Spirits Cocktail Book. A podcast host and producer and owner-operator of a number of hospitality-centric companies that help businesses take their concepts on a napkin to post-opening reality. I enjoyed this episode, and I hope you do as well. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Dr. Nick with another episode of the Hospitality Spirit Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Shawn Soole. Shawn, thanks for being with us today on the Hospitality Spirit.
Thanks for having me.
So, Shawn, we always start with the present, and then we work our way backwards and kind of see where the river takes us. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your big focus is right now?
Oh, the big focus right now, like as we start rolling out openings and stuff like that, I think that's super important in facilitating that for my own bar. Like I run a little cocktail bar in a hotel right now in Victoria called Clive's Classic Lounge. And so the rollout for that, but I also am helping a number of clients roll out to full occupancy. So the BC government has said that within the next 4 weeks, we're going to be back to 100% occupancy, no masks. And so that's a massive leap. Mm-hmm. I think anyone in the hospitality industry knows that while most people think 6 weeks is a long time in the hospitality industry to hire and get people set up, 6 weeks is not that long at all. And so that's my big focus right now, is just trying to wrap my head around what it's going to look like. And if we continue with the caseload that we've sort of reduced in BC, if it's going to roll out on time, because you can't really get too far ahead of yourself because it could all turn backwards real quick.
Well, and that's it. I mean, it's such a moving target. I mean, we know what the regulations are today, but next week, based on changes and new variations and new strains, all that could completely change. So that's, I completely see. We're experiencing that here in Chicago as well. Mm-hmm. I think there's probably a general consensus, though, that the hospitality engine is starting to rev up, and it's really good to see. We see quite a lot of variations between occupancy, what's allowed in different places. Obviously, we're now into the summertime, so the whole outdoor dining scene is much easier than it was in the wintertime. But you're right, it is absolutely a moving target that we see.
Just for mine, we went from 18 seats to 68 seats in 24 hours.
Oh my gosh. Well, just from a purely staffing perspective, and that's just one side of it. But then you've got the procurement side of it. How do you make sure you've got the inventory you need on hand, and all the things with spoilage that you could possibly have? I mean, that just must be a headache.
Yeah, but we're getting there. It's every day seems a little bit easier, a little bit brighter.
So it seems like, based on kind of some of the research I did on you, a lot of the businesses that you're associated with and you really consult today are really kind of focused on the beverage side of the industry. How did you kind of get involved in that side of things?
Yeah, it is broad, and I've been bartending, and I always say I'm a bartender still, because I still bartend a couple of days a week at Clive's to help the team out and sort of keep the finger on the pulse there. I started bartending when I was 18 years old in Australia, and so I fell into cocktails and really loved cocktails in that sort of direction. And so it just became a natural thing. And so when I came to Canada, especially here in Victoria, we didn't really have a cocktail culture. And so that was in 2006. And so I could see something coming over the horizon. So I really dug into the beverage side of things for food and beverage, ran a couple of big restaurants, some franchises. And then I actually took over Clive's in 2009 to 2013. And in that time, Clive's became one of the best hotel bars in the world and one of the top awarded cocktail bars in the country of Canada. So for me, it's always been a natural progression, but it's where I sort of am comfortable and at home. But running restaurants and opening restaurants and helping restaurant tours for chefs and cooks and food and that sort of thing is something I'm very passionate about as well.
So paint the picture for us, if you will, Shawn, this idea of cocktail culture. You said when you arrived in BC, that really didn't exist. But for those that maybe aren't familiar with what that term means, talk a little bit about that, if you could.
Cocktail culture is an interesting beast. Now looking back, when I was a lot younger and a lot more, not I suppose not opinionated, but I think any sort of culture in our food and beverage scene hits a certain point of saturation when the macro market understands it. And I think when it comes to cocktails and wine and craft beer and farm to table food, um, as industry people, we sort of fall in love with this aspect. But it's not until you sort of get a really strong, like a good strong saturation of the market understanding that. And I know that we've got that in BC because we had a massive Campari shortage during COVID because everybody was drinking Negronis, and so
Mhm.
like a Negroni is a weird cocktail, and I wouldn't say it's mainstream, but to have a Campari shortage means that there's a lot of people buying Campari.
Wow.
And so I like to see how it sort of the saturation in the macro market sort of plays to actually have a culture where people are actually going out to think about what they're drinking and what they're eating. I used to love because people used to go geeking out about coffee at their local roasters and local coffee shops, and then they'd have a burger with farm to table meat and a glass of craft beer, and then dinner would roll around, and they'd have a horrible cocktail poured off the gun
Mhm.
with their with their local BC wine and their farm to table meal. I'm like, but what? Why do you not put this much effort into cocktails? But now, definitely after 10 years, we've definitely got a good point where a lot of people love cocktails in our city, and we're very lucky. We're a small city with a lot of people who love it. So super passionate people in a small city is the dream.
Mhm. What do you attribute that to? I mean, I love your analogy of a burger and a craft beer, but then they didn't really understand the cocktail aspect of it. Is that a lack of understanding? Is that an intimidation factor? Is that it's maybe seen as something that's not going to match up with their price point? I mean, how do you attribute that lack of understanding and willingness to try it early on?
I think it's a little bit of all the columns you just mentioned. The one thing that I did early on at Clive's is that most bars and restaurants have brand ambassadors come in and do seminars for the industry and do tastings and all these things. And the one thing that I sort of mandated when we first started Clive's 2009 was that every time a brand ambassador came in, they had to bring twice as much product because they were going to do two tastings, one during the day for the industry
Hmm.
and then one at night for the general public. And the one at night, the general public was never meant to be watered down. It had to be the same level of education as the industry one. And I'd warn brand ambassadors because they thought that it was going to be a sort of
Hmm.
flighty
Sure.
general public tasting, and it's like no, you're going to have people asking you what percentage your whiskey goes into the barrel, your
Hmm.
new make goes into the barrel, and you're going to have people asking like how tall your column stills are, and they'd be like yeah sure, and then sure enough those questions would come out. And so for me it was about that education portion was so you can lead a horse to water but you can't make it drink.
Hmm.
So you can have a really pretty cocktail bar and a really great menu with all these like big name bartenders, but if there's no customers that won't last very long.
Hmm.
So education for industry and the general consumer was so important, and so we had this massive swath of general consumers who were as educated as a lot of the bartenders that were pouring cocktails in Victoria, but that also gave mutual respect and really opened up the market to being able to sell like Fernet Branca like water and that sort of
Hmm.
thing.
How does the customer experience differ when you're talking about going to a cocktail bar versus going to a, I don't want to use the term traditional bar, but enlighten me. What is the cocktail experience like in your mind, and how does it differ from other traditional going out and having some drinks?
Oh, I think it's about the bartender just taking the
Hmm.
time to take a breath and understand that the consumer may not know what they want. They may know what they like,
Hmm.
but they don't know how to attach that to your menu or to your bar and stuff like that. So I've had people come in and say they want like crown and ginger. And
Hmm.
then they're like, "Oh, but I want it in a cocktail." And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Okay, cool. So little ginger syrup. Let's make an old fashioned style. Get a bigger ballsy style Canadian whiskey and make an old fashioned style using those sort of flavors, lime leaf bitters and that sort of thing. And you've basically made an old fashioned using the exact same flavor profiles that they usually enjoy drinking. So from a bartender's point of view, it's a little bit different because you can't have favorites. You can't really make your favorite drink for everybody. It's really about taking those 3 extra steps of saying, what do you usually drink? This is what I think you should have. Do you like it?
Can you almost draw a parallel to a sommelier in a restaurant? I
Oh,
mean,
for
going up and
sure.
saying, someone's like, well, I want, this is what I'm having. And, do you drink by place? Do you drink by what you're eating? Do you drink by what you like? It seems like cocktails would be very similar.
Very, very similar. And that's, and yes, because it's like, well, I like big buttery Chardonnays from Napa. Okay,
Hmm.
well, you're probably gonna like this malolactic fermented Chablis out of
Hmm.
France. And so yeah, it's just having the patience to it, because you can really build some solid clientele and some really good following. Um, by taking the time and having that patience, and then training your staff to do the same too. Like
Mm.
this, the staff always know, okay, they had this one drink, what's going to be their next drink? Because you have to sort of not necessarily do an upsell, but what's the next drink at the same sort of flavor profiles?
So, I mean, and to that point about training and development, I mean, it seems, are you hiring someone because of their artistic kind of nature? Are you hiring somebody because they can critically think through dealing with a customer and what they might like? Is it purely about rote memorization of all the different cocktail options that exist out there? I mean, finding the right person for that to deliver a really great cocktail experience must be tough.
It can be, but what I look for is the innate DNA of the fundamentals of hospitality, in the way of like, you're having someone come into your, and I say at your house, you're coming into your house and they want an experience. How are you going to do that? And having that personality, and that, not necessarily bend over backwards, but that, as you said, critical thinking of, how do I give this person the best experience they possibly can have, cocktails they've never had before. Everything else can be taught. Like
Mhm.
me saying, like, I'm not going to hire someone because their gin knowledge is really epic. I'm going to hire someone with personality first, and that's for service staff and like people on the floor. But for bartenders, I hire based on how's your mise en place. Like we do, when we're full capacity, we're doing upwards of 500, 600, 700 cocktails a night between
Wow.
two bartenders in an 8 hour shift, so it is a high volume venue. And so for me, I'm looking for bartenders who have lots of mise en place experience, lots of
Mhm.
nightclub experience, that sort of thing, because everything else can be taught. It's just an adaptation of the skill set that they may have from working in a high volume bar to making cocktails.
So, for somebody that's not familiar with the term mise en place, can you walk them through what that would mean? I think they might know what it means in a kitchen perspective, getting all your stuff in line, but what does it mean from a beverage perspective?
It's pretty much the same. It's like, put everything back where you found it. Like
Hmm.
it's pretty. I'm pretty blunt when got a couple of my team that, when I'm not there, they like to like spread stuff out everywhere, and I'm
Hmm.
like, dude, just put it back where you found it. Like it goes back in the same spot every time. Muscle memory is a big thing, and it's similar to a kitchen, because you've only got a space of maybe 5 foot wide and 3 feet deep that you live in for 8 hours, and so everything's going to be in the same spot. Moving stuff around all the time or reorganizing doesn't really make sense. And so yeah, mise en place for the bar is exactly the same. Just put it back where you found it.
Well, and a lot of times it doesn't, the things that you're, correct me if I'm wrong here, but many of the things that you're incorporating into these cocktails aren't necessarily what someone would consider the back of the bar in bottles that are easily grabbable. I mean, sometimes it's things that are fresh, sometimes it's things that are refrigerated, sometimes it's things that are frozen, sometimes it's things that are packed together very gingerly. I mean, so it's all kinds of things that go into these cocktails.
Yeah, and that's I've really delved into that with bar design in the last couple of years, so that you're still only taking two seats. Like your vermouth should be refrigerated at all times, so that's going to be in the fridge to your left. Your
Mm.
ice is going to be just directly to your left or directly to your right, depending which on well you are on. And yeah, I find there's a in a high volume bar like ours, with the level of cocktails that we do, there's almost a level of like Michelin star precision in the way of plating, but without the time factor,
Hmm.
without that time to actually make it work. Um, how do you have 15 different styles of dehydrated fruits? And I opened a bar once a couple of years ago that had 14 different styles of ice.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and we'd still do super high volume in that bar, because I think high volume gets sort of poo-pooed by a lot of high-end cocktail bars because, well, high volume means less quality, and I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. So yeah, like it is there's meticulous little things, and it can't always be set up exactly like a kitchen because you do have to serve guests, and
Mhm.
you can't have that big distance with prep tables and stuff like you do in the kitchen. It has to be a little tighter.
Are the cocktail operations that you're really involved in, is there also a food component to it, or is it I mean, when I talk about food, a meal, or is it primarily just a cocktail experience?
Oh no, we definitely have food. We're in the process of sort of evolving our food program at Clive's right now to be definitely realigning back to sort of like a classic European style hotel lobby style venue,
Hmm.
which taking back over late last year after COVID, I really want to bring that sort of an original concept that I had in 2009 back to it a little bit. A food component, while it can be a great addition to cocktails, it has to be very balanced in the way of what is your main focus
Hmm.
and what battles do you want to fight. Um, Beer, wine is included in that sort of thing. Like
Hmm.
right now, for me, we are a cocktail bar.
Hmm.
That's the nature of beast. We have a 15 to 20 item menu plus cheese boards and
Hmm.
desserts and stuff. But like, how simple do we want the food to be presented in a way that the guest knows what they're getting?
Hmm.
Do I want my staff romancing a $20 cocktail and then, or romancing a $6 beer or a $7 glass of wine
Hmm.
or food? So I've been picking very focused on where do we make our money, how do we make our money, where do I want the effort going into in that service standard, for the staff. And obviously cocktails are definitely what we're known for. So it's venue specific. Some venues will want to have a really big food program as well as having a big cocktail program, which is great. It's just a lot of training. And I find when you try and be something for everybody, that something's going to get missed. Like
Hmm.
something's going to be not 100% or 110% in this case when it comes to cocktails. So yeah, we have a really great food program at Clive's. I've had like open a Mexican restaurant with a huge Mexican inspired menu that had a 120 bottle back bar of tequila, mezcals, and sotols. Yeah, food is a big component, but for me, it has to be portrayed in a very different light.
In a place like Clive's or other places that you've been associated with that are very heavily cocktail focused, is there a seasonality component to what you're serving, or is it pretty much year round? You're seeing the same kind of clientele, so the preferences really don't change tremendously.
We change up our menu every 4 months.
Hmm.
So we do like a full big change every 4 months with sort of rotations in the 6 month range. So we do spring, summer, and then winter, autumn, and those drinks definitely lean into hot drinks
Hmm.
and flips and that sort of thing. Or right now we're rolling really heavily into our summer menu, which has a lot of we brought a slushy machine in. And we got really nice classic cocktails on a slushy machine.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, we have a dark and stormy slushy and a Knickerbocker slushy right
Hmm.
now. So we change depending on the season. It's been difficult this last little while with occupancies and stuff. So we haven't done as big a change on our menu as I would normally do with my team, purely
Hmm.
because I don't feel like we've had enough bodies through the door to experience the menu we had. Um, but usually we would change it up completely, like complete scrap and redo every 6 months.
How does Vancouver, British Columbia, kind of where you're in that region, how does that compare to other kind of cities in North America, but maybe also countries? I'm reason I ask that is I'm thinking back to an episode of a show I saw recently about the cocktail culture in Japan, and it's a very, very intense, and it's an experience that it would take 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes to make a cocktail. I mean, how does where you are compare to others? Is there a lot of difference? Are there ones that really stand out in your mind outside of BC?
Um, I think every city's got a slightly different style.
Hmm.
For BC, for Vancouver and Victoria, we're very lucky. We've almost got 80 distilleries here in the province,
Hmm.
and so there's a lot of local spirits being folded into a lot of programs all across the province in a fantastically great way. Because I think supporting local distilleries is fantastic. There's certain definitely culture differences in flavor profiling. Like Victoria is known for like loving brown spirits, bitter, straight up like boulevardiers, old pals, Negronis. That's the sort of stuff that a
Hmm.
lot of people love. Um, when it comes to Japan, Japan has been built on a completely different style of culture of this Japanese hospitality and this Japanese precision. But yeah, I think back in the day it was a little bit more segregated because of technology. We didn't have social media and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
traveling around the world now, I was in Singapore for 6 months in 2019, opening venues, and every style of venue exists there, like classic New York style cocktail bars where old fashions and Manhattans rule. You'd go to a different bar and they're roto vapping different ingredients,
Hmm.
very scientific and very Dave Arnold out of New York. Toronto on the East Coast definitely gets influenced by Chicago and New York quite a bit. So yeah, but I think with the social media now, like I don't think there's a style that exists per city that stands out for me, because you just throw another rock and you find another bar that is completely insanely crazy.
Hmm.
And so Singapore was mind blowing because of the diversity of different bars there. There was bars that only focused on local Southeast Asian spirits and
Hmm.
this and that. So um,
Well, as a former, I mean, I used to live in Singapore, but I lived in Singapore in the mid 2000s, and I mean, there was virtually nothing there.
yeah,
It was basically a bucket of Tiger beer at a hawker
yep,
center, and they had to keep refilling the ice because it was 95 degrees outside.
exactly.
But then I would kind of go back every year. Singapore is actually one of the cities where we in the School of Hospitality at DePaul do our study abroad. So thank you for that segue. Promise I didn't tee it up for you. But it's always interesting to go back to Singapore. I mean, right around the mid 2000s, so like 2009, 2010, when they started to really focus on tourism, inbound
Mhm.
tourism, really putting a lot of money into Changi. That's
Yeah,
when Marina Bay Sands opened up. That's when Resorts World opened up. And then all of a sudden, Club Street and Duxton Hill,
yep,
all of a sudden, these little shop houses turned into these really cool cocktail bars.
yeah.
And it was nice to see. I mean, it completely changed the landscape. Now, Singapore is, for those that don't know, Singapore is not a cheap place to drink.
No.
I think there's a misconception. Singapore is actually one of the more expensive cities in Asia, I think, or if not the world, to drink because of the levy and the tax they put on it. Um, but it's a culture that was also very forward thinking. That Singapore is a very relatively young country, and it's one of the most modern cities in the world. And I think people are sometimes taken aback by how short a period of time Singapore was able to evolve into what it is today.
Hmm.
So it's not surprising that these cocktail bars that you see there are just remarkable, but they've almost sprung up overnight.
Oh, they are like 28 HKS, which I would say would be the first proper cocktail bar in Singapore, opened in 2012.
Hmm.
So I love the culture there. It was
So that's
very
less than
modern.
10 years ago. I mean, basically
Yeah,
8 years ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
and so I love the culture there, but there is certain cons to a culture that has expanded so exponentially.
Hmm.
And now that people are saying Singapore is like the cocktail hotbed for Southeast Asia and for that whole area of the world, I find there's a few cons that come along with that
Mm.
in the way of young bartenders, not enough older mentors,
Sure.
and that sort of thing. But yeah, the cocktail scene is just insane. Like I think even since I left, I've seen 8 to 12 new cocktail bars open and like get on like top 50 lists
That's
in
true.
two
Yeah.
years.
It's interesting because you almost wonder if it's one of the things about Singapore, but also Vancouver's the exact same way as is, or a lot of cities in the Pacific Northwest, where you have lots of different cultures coming together, living very harmoniously together. I mean, Singapore, for example, you've got the Malay, Indian, and Chinese cultures all living very seamlessly together, and that I think sometimes is also one of the things that spurs innovation. It's this a friendly competition, if you will,
Hmm.
amongst people, and that's really nice to see. Shawn, you talk about mentors, and this is a theme that constantly comes up on the hospitality spirit when we talk. What roles really have mentors played for you in kind of the development of your career and all the success that you've had?
This is a tough one because I do get asked this one quite regularly about who my mentors were, and it's hard because even when I was back home in Brisbane, the culture was still very young, and so there was a lot of us who were in that 22 to 26-year-old range. There was not a lot of older generation in the cocktail scene, so really it was about buying a ton of books, researching what you could, because there was no internet at that time, or there was limited internet, like you have to go to the library and dial up. And there was not a lot of information on the internet about it anyway, so you'd
Mhm.
be buying books and you'd be swapping information and learning stories and sort of be all co-mentoring each other, which is really, really organic and helpful and nice. And being Australian, everybody's super competitive, but everybody wants to help each other out as well. So it's
Mhm.
this wonderful dichotomy of, so I'm going to be better than you, but if you need help, just let me know.
Well, it's kind of synonymous in a lot of things. I mean, that's kind of how Aussie rules footy is. That's how
Well,
rugby
exactly,
league. That's how rugby league is. I mean, it's all friendly competition.
exactly. And so,
Shameless plug: Gold Coast Titans. Go Gold
oh,
Coast Titans.
wow, wow, Gold Coast Titans,
I'm a
um,
big Gold Coast Titans guy.
Brisbane Broncos all the way. Um,
Well,
but yeah,
they're
so
neighbors. They're friendly competition.
exactly. But yeah, like mentors wise, like I've got a couple of mentors that I met later on in life that have definitely helped me and springboarded me up into having a little bit more exposure internationally. It's
Mhm.
always difficult. Like I don't want to leave Victoria. I love Victoria. My wife was born and bred here. My daughter
Mhm.
was born here. And so for me, I have to work really hard to get the same exposure as someone, say, in Vancouver or Toronto, because of being in this little city. But that's
Mhm.
my choice. And so a lot of people have asked me this about who influences your stuff, and a lot of the people that influence me are the kids who I've mentored myself, the
Yeah.
ones that have now gone on to run restaurants and come up with these crazy cocktails, or have gone into the kitchen and start running multi-person teams and stuff like that. So for me, my inspiration comes from the generation below me that are really like leading the way and sort of taking my position in the industry and sort of spreading out that love. And so mentorship is different for me because I mentor a lot of people, but a
Mhm.
lot of times the people that I mentor are the ones that actually influence me more.
It's powerful. I mean, I think, but the common denominator of everybody that I talk to says that regardless if you're a mentor or a mentee, the act of mentorship is incredibly powerful. And it's powerful for the mentor as it is for the mentee. I mean, we have a mentor program here in the school, and a lot of times I'll go to senior leaders in an organization and I'll say, you really want to find ways to develop your young managers, have them be a mentor to a student.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a great way. I mean, because we've had mentors, but the act of actually helping someone and creating a relationship where they're not scared to ask you questions and they're not scared to be totally green, totally naive. I mean, that makes the transition for them into the industry eventually, the mentee, that much easier because they feel that it's a very safe space. I've always felt that while hospitality can be an incredibly stressful industry, it can be incredibly taxing mentally. It has all of its challenges. It's also an incredibly welcoming environment. The friendships that you meet, the lifelong bonds that you'll have with people is tremendous. And mentorship is one of the ways to do that. I mean, I had a mentor when I was an undergraduate at UNLV, and I still stay in contact with this mentor today. That's almost 30, 20, 30 years ago.
Hmm.
That a really good mentor will be a mentor for life, and you can always go back and ask them questions, and you feel safe. And I think that's really important.
Very much so. I went back to school. I went back to do my advanced diploma in hospitality and tourism management, at a at the local Camosun College in 2018, and I was in it. I was one of the oldest people in the class with a cohort of a lot of international students, and it got to a stage where I was picking them up so they weren't late for school in the morning.
Mhm.
So I would pick them up and drop them, like get them to school, drop them off at home so that they were all never late for class. But the amount of the different cultural aspects of that really helped me grow a lot of empathy for a younger generation, which I didn't think I didn't think I was getting in the industry at that time.
Mhm.
But understanding that the younger generation and how the generation's thinking and how their work-life balance and stuff like that is growing. It showed me a hell of a lot of empathy during that time.
Sure. Wrapping up, I mean, keeping with this theme of the future. If someone's listening to this right now, maybe they're an aspiring cocktail artist, cocktail maker, or maybe they just don't know what they want to do, and this is kind of interest to them. I mean, how does somebody go from being as green as the grass to sitting behind a bar with just another bartender making awesome craft cocktails? I mean, what are the traditional steps? Is it starting out just tending bar? Is it starting just learning the restaurant ropes, bussing tables, washing dishes? I mean, what's the route here that you would suggest, Shawn?
So for me, if you're starting off in the industry, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. If you walk into a venue, that's a new house. Again, it goes back to walking into a new house and just asking questions, listening more than you're talking, and learning what that house is about, and sort of building what you've already know and folding in what you're being taught to create a new style. I think style and knowledge needs to be constantly evolving and building. And so there's that. But then I have always an unpopular opinion. When you're 20 years old, 21 years old, and you're starting in the restaurant industry, if a venue isn't fulfilling you anymore, it's time to move on.
I agree. Yeah.
I talk to people who are managers, and they're like, well, they worked at 10 different places in 7 years. I'm like, well, they're 20 years old. Like, they're 21 years old. Like, they shouldn't be getting the one job. It's not like they're getting an office job where they're going to be there till they retire. Like, go into a place, suck out all the information and all knowledge you can do. As soon as it stops filling you over a couple of months, move on to a next step. And it has to be steps. You shouldn't ever make a unilateral move. It always should be step up, and keep building on the knowledge you have, and go and apply for jobs at places that you think that may not hire you, but got to apply and got to try. And so move around, enjoy that those formidable years from 21 to like 30 even, and learn everything you can, and eventually you'll find a spot that fulfills you professionally and personally, and then that's where the spot that you'll go, you know what, I can be a manager here. You know what, I can grow here for a little bit longer. I've got a really great owner who's a mentor and wants to take me to another venue, and all these sort of different things. And so that's always my biggest piece of advice, and a lot of people don't love that piece of advice, but jump around.
I think it's good advice. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's good or bad advice coming from hospitality professionals that have been successful. And I think, and the reason I say that is because everybody's path was different. You know, I started out, literally the first job was washing dishes in a restaurant, then moved my way over to hotels and started working at front desk, and went to hotel school, thought I was going to be a GM, ran luxury resorts, and then all of a sudden I went over to HR and I fell in love with training, and now I'm a teacher. So, I mean, everybody's experience is totally different, and that's okay. And I think what you take away from it is A, everybody's experience is going to be different, but B, make sure you're doing something that you love, because there's probably not an industry that's more difficult to work in than hospitality if you're doing something that you don't enjoy doing. It shouldn't be a job. I mean, it should just be something that you love doing. And I think our conversation today has really shown that Shawn, you love what you do, and it comes across in the way that you talk about it. It comes across in your experience. It comes across in the diversification of things that you're involved in, and it's just really great to see and talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Well, with that being said, Shawn Soole, this has been a great conversation. I learned a lot. It's always a good podcast when I learn a little bit about something new, and if anything, I'm now probably thirstier than I was when I started here 30 minutes ago. So thanks for being a guest on the Hospitality Spirit today.
Thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate it.
You're probably thinking, why would I even bother reading there on a daily basis? There's heaps of other places on offer. When I change to another place, if the bacon is rubber.